Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at Slightly Mad's upcoming Project Cars 3, and see how it compares visually to the previous entry to the series, Project Cars 2. For this demonstration, both games are being played on the PC with the graphics settings pushed as high as possible at a native 1440p resolution. However, the motion blur and super sampling options will be disabled. I also want to thank both Bandai Namco for providing the key for this title, and Thrustmaster for hooking me up with the T300RS Racing Wheel, which I will be using throughout this video in both games. Alright, so to kick this comparison off, let's check out how the quality of the vehicle models has evolved, starting with the McLaren P1. Now, aside from the slightly different livery color and the updated license plate, I was surprised to find that there really hasn't been any changes to the quality of the vehicle model itself. The taillights, the rims, fender, and mirrors, the whole car has been recycled in its entirety. Though that's not necessarily a bad thing. Project Cars 2 already has some gorgeously detailed vehicles that needed very little improvements. The only problem that I do wish was addressed is the poor aliasing, an issue that has plagued the series since the beginning. You'll notice with all of these cars and wide shots of the environment that the anti-aliasing method just doesn't cut it. And if you play on anything lower than 4K, it'll no doubt stand out pretty badly. I'm also a little disappointed with the quality of the shadows, that, while slightly better than before, still looks badly pixelated and disconnected. This is especially obvious when looking at our next vehicle, the Acura NSX, where the shadows of the side mirror appear a little bit crisper, but still suffer from some bad pixelation, mainly around the border. But again, just like with the McLaren, the NSX still looks fantastic, and there's a lot of great attention to detail that is accentuated a bit more in Project Cars 3, like this much higher quality churn signal. Overall, when it comes to the vehicle models that were already featured in Project Cars 2, it seems the developers simply ported these exact same designs over into the latest release. And aside from a few incredibly minor details here and there, you really aren't going to notice many changes. It is worth mentioning, though, that Project Cars 3 features 22 more cars on top of its already impressive 189 cars featured previously. Next up, we have the environments. Much like with the vehicle models, not much has changed here from Project Cars 2. A lot of the classic locations make a return, like Mount Panorama, Brands Hatch, Daytona, and Monaco. But there's also a lot of brand new locations like Shanghai and Tuscany. Sadly, there are a few locations and track variations that have been left off the list, dropping the total track locations from 63 down to 51. As for the quality of the environments themselves, there's not really much to say. Slightly Mad seems to have carried over a lot of these environments directly as well, and along with it, all of the same textures and layouts. The road texture, for example, is identical, ignoring the slight difference in the ambient lighting. And all the props along the side of the road, like fuel pumps, tire stacks, railings, and various more complex terrain, all match up exactly. I did find that the grass areas have been reworked though. The 3D grass objects have been shortened and reduced in density, and the texture map has also been replaced with something that appears a little bit more realistic. I also found that this blue striped curb that, while still sporting an identical texture, has had the light dirt shader removed. Though a bigger, far more noticeable change are the new background objects thrown into some of the larger tracks, like this large Ferris wheel sitting in the center of the brickyard, or the same Ferris wheel dropped behind the stands at Brands Hatch. I'm not quite sure if these Ferris wheels are typically in these locations in real life, but it does provide some nice color variety, especially during night races. But aside from that, and some of the pedestrian sprites being shuffled around, you won't notice any big improvements to the quality of the environments in Project Cars 3. Moving on to lighting, there do appear to be some slight changes to how this is handled in Project Cars 3. While lighting is still fully dynamic, and there's an insane amount of options to tweak to fine-tune your driving experience, I do get the sense that the options are a little bit less robust this time around. You can't fine-tune the exact hour like you could before, but can instead only select between a few preset times of day like afternoon, evening, dusk, dawn, etc. And then the actual lighting itself isn't quite as impressive either. I tried to match up this sunset sequence exactly and found that not only was the lens flare effect removed, but the guide rays don't seem to be quite as exaggerated. On the bright side, I do feel as though the color quality in Project Cars 3 has seen a nice improvement. This metallic orange paint job on the McLaren is much brighter and more vibrant in the latest game. The same is true with the Acura, that has a much more bright white appearance. I also found that the quality of the reflections has improved a tiny bit as well. with higher resolution images being reflected back and more detail being expressed along the metallic panels of the car. However, this doesn't translate quite as well to nighttime scenes, that are disappointing when compared to the older title. Despite setting the time of day to the latest time possible, Project Cars 3's nighttime scenes appear too bright, almost as if the sun hasn't fully set yet. This results in a really flat-looking image that pales in comparison to the night scenes in Project Cars 2. Thankfully, the shadows are improved a little bit in the new game. The vehicle accent pieces still cast some rough-looking projections, but the full car shadows that are cast on the ground look great now. And the environmental shadows from things like trees and light poles all have a cleaner look to them. Then of course we have effects. Here's where Project Cars 3 and 2 really start to stand apart. Right away, one of the biggest changes I've noticed were the improvements made to the smoke effects. In Project Cars 2, smoke effects are rare and barely visible, even when burning out or coming to a sudden stop. But Project Cars 3 has new smoke effects that appear more opaque and are more noticeable as a result. It'd probably be better if the effects reacted more naturally to the ambient light, but it at least makes burnouts more satisfying than before. The game's damage and destruction has also seen some nice improvements. Scratches along the side of the car now appear like the paint has actually been scratched off, rather than just the glitchy outlines of scratches that were used before. And the body deformation seems to be working more reliably, whereas it previously took several large hits to get similar results. You'll notice that for their damage model, there's a lot of the exact same points that will always break away the same way based on how the player impacts them. The glass will break with several of the same effects all around the windshield, and the same exact scratches will appear at specific points. But all these functioning properly and at the same time helps to make Project Cars 3's damage model more convincing, and more satisfying as a result. Other effects like rain and snow look incredible in Project Cars 2, and thankfully have also been recycled into the new game. Though I did notice that the blizzard weather type isn't nearly as blinding as it was before, and the way water would spray up from other racers' tires has been toned down considerably, to the point where it's barely noticeable. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you think has the superior audio design?
Okay mate, take it steady on the outlap, warm the tyres and we start pushing hard.
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, I feel as though Project Cars 3 really hasn't done much to improve on the visual quality over its predecessor. All of the same vehicles and environments have just been recycled directly into this new title, with only a few very minor touch-ups here and there. And effects like the lighting design and the way water splashes up when racing through heavy storms feels like a noticeable step back. But one of the most unusual changes has been made to the feel of the gameplay itself. Project Cars started off as a very difficult racing simcade experience, with realistic handling, beautiful visuals, and a goal to deliver a more realistic racing experience. But with Project Cars 3, there's been a huge emphasis on a much more arcade-like mentality. The entire UI has been redesigned to be more flashy and clean, with a simpler list of options to select between to help get into a race as fast as possible. This makes the menus a lot easier to navigate, though fans of Project Cars 2 will no doubt be disappointed with this simplified approach. Then you get to the actual racing, that is significantly easier to control. With an Xbox gamepad, cars would slip and slide all over the place in Project Cars 2, even on the easiest settings. But with Project Cars 3, even on the harder difficulty settings, the cars feel more tight and easier to maneuver. This is improved even further when driving with a racing wheel, with much faster response times and more forgiving turns. You'll also notice a lot of new arcade elements thrown into the experience, like XP points for performing certain maneuvers, and new UI prompts that indicate approaching vehicles around you. It's almost like playing a new Need for Speed game, which I feel might not be the best direction for the developers to take this series. There's also a revamped career mode, various other new challenge modes like Rivals and Breakout, along with all the other modes featured previously. But if you're looking for a new racing experience with some fantastic visuals and new content to master, then Project Cars 3 is definitely worth checking out. Though if you already own Project Cars 2, then you may want to hold off for a sale on this newest entry. So what do you guys think? Do you feel like Project Cars 3 looks better, the same, or worse than Project Cars 2? And how do you feel about the change to the feel of the gameplay design? Let me know in the comments section. If you're interested in picking up a peripheral racing wheel and want to try out the set that I'm using, you can find a link to the T300RS listed in the description below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.